If people keep crossing your boundaries, it is rarely because you are too kind. More often, it is because you have become predictable. You explain too much. You respond too quickly. You feel the urge to keep the peace, even when something inside you tightens and warns you that a line has been crossed. From the outside, this looks like maturity, understanding, reasonable. But beneath that calm, something quieter is happening. You are being read, rushed, and subtly guided into agreements you never intended to make. Think about the last conversation that left you drained. Not angry, not explosive, just strangely tired. Replaying words in your mind, wondering how a simple request turned into an obligation you now carry. This is how manipulation usually works. Not through force, not through volume, but through access, through your willingness to explain yourself, through your discomfort with silence, through your fear of being seen as difficult, selfish, or cold. And the most dangerous part is that you may believe you are being virtuous while your energy slowly leaks away. Stoicism never asked you to be hard or aggressive. It never taught domination or emotional withdrawal. It taught clarity. It taught restraint. It taught the discipline of knowing where you end and where others begin. The Stoics understood something modern people often miss. When your inner boundaries are weak, your outer life becomes chaotic. When they are firm, calm becomes a form of power, not loud power, not intimidating power, the kind of power that cannot be rushed, guilt-tripped, or negotiated away. This video is not about confrontation. It is about becoming psychologically unmoved, about building 5 Stoic boundaries that quietly change how people experience you. Boundaries that do not require explanations, arguments, or announcements. Boundaries that make you feel solid inside your own decisions, even when others are uncomfortable. If you have ever said yes while your body said no, if you have ever felt pressure disguised as urgency, or guilt disguised as care, what you are about to hear was meant for you. Stay with me, because once you see where your energy has been leaking, you will never give access so easily again. Before we talk about boundaries, we need to correct a misunderstanding. Most people think boundaries are social tools, polite lines you draw so others behave better. Stoicism sees something deeper. Boundaries are not about controlling people. They are about protecting judgment. And in Stoic philosophy, judgment is everything. The Stoics taught that life does not disturb us. People do not disturb us. Events do not disturb us. What disturbs us is the meaning we assign to what happens. The moment you allow someone else to rush your decisions, guilt you into agreement, or pull you into endless explanations, you are no longer acting from reason. You are reacting from emotion. And that is the exact moment manipulation becomes possible. This is why boundaries equal freedom in Stoicism. Freedom is not the absence of constraints. It is the ability to act according to reason, even under pressure. A person without boundaries may appear kind, flexible, and agreeable, but inwardly they are fragmented. Their attention is scattered. Their decisions are porous. Their sense of self is constantly negotiated in conversation. Stoicism calls this a form of inner slavery. Epictetus was blunt about this. He warned that the moment you hand over control of your judgments to others, you hand over your peace. Not because others are evil, but because human nature will always test what it can move. If your inner limits are unclear, the world will keep pushing until it finds resistance. Boundaries, then, are not defensive walls. They are acts of clarity. They separate what is up to you from what is not. Your time, your attention, your consent, your pace. These belong to you. Other people's reactions, disappointment, confusion, or discomfort do not. When this distinction is firm inside you, something important changes. You stop managing impressions. You stop rehearsing explanations. You stop negotiating your worth in real time. This is why Stoic boundaries feel quiet but heavy. They do not announce themselves. They do not argue. They simply remove access where access is misused. And this removal is not punishment. It is alignment. When your actions match your values, your nervous system settles. You no longer replay conversations at night. You no longer feel that familiar tension in your chest after saying yes when you meant no. You begin to trust yourself again. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself that no one can harm your inner citadel unless you invite them in. Most manipulation is an invitation we extend unconsciously, through urgency, through over-explaining, through guilt-driven compliance. The Stoic does not harden against the world. He becomes precise within it. The 5 boundaries you are about to hear are not rules for controlling others. They are disciplines for governing yourself. Each one closes a specific psychological opening that manipulators rely on. Each one returns a piece of your attention back to you. Practiced together, they transform boundaries from something you defend into something you simply live. And we begin with the most important one, the boundary that, by itself, can save you years of emotional exhaustion. Boundary number 1. You stop explaining yourself to people who have already decided to misunderstand you. One of the clearest signs that your boundaries are being tested is not aggression, it is repetition. You say no, calmly. They ask why. You explain. They question your tone, your intention, your timing. You clarify. They poke holes. You explain again. By the 3rd explanation, something has shifted. The conversation is no longer about the boundary. It is about you, your character, your motives, your worthiness to say no. This is the core mechanism of manipulation through over-explaining. Manipulators rarely attack boundaries directly. They invite you to justify them. Every explanation becomes a handle. Every detail becomes leverage. As long as you are explaining, the boundary remains open for negotiation. And because you want to be fair, reasonable, and understood, you keep talking long after clarity was already achieved. Over-explaining feels responsible, but it is often driven by discomfort with silence. Silence feels risky. It feels like abandonment or conflict, so you fill the space with words, hoping to be seen as kind rather than firm. But Stoicism is clear here. When your reasoning is sound, further explanation is not virtue. It is leakage. Epictetus warned that if you want to protect your inner freedom, you must be willing to be misunderstood, not because misunderstanding is good, but because clarity does not require consensus. A boundary is not a courtroom. It does not need evidence, witnesses, or closing arguments. It needs consistency. The Stoic correction is simple and demanding. You state the boundary once, without emotional charge. I'm not comfortable with that. I can't do that. That doesn't work for me. These are not openings. They are conclusions. When the follow-up questions arrive, you do not escalate. You do not defend. You allow silence to do the work. Silence forces the other person to sit with reality instead of reshaping it. In daily life, this might look subtle. A colleague pushes for an explanation beyond what is necessary. You repeat the boundary. Once, unchanged. A family member presses emotionally. You do not add details. You change the subject or disengage. At first, this will feel unnatural. You may feel rude, cold, or anxious. That discomfort is not intuition. It is conditioning breaking. Here is the paradox Stoics understood. People who respect you do not need explanations. People who seek control will never be satisfied by them. The moment you stop explaining, you expose which one you are dealing with. Boundary number 2. Never decide under pressure. Pressure is one of the oldest tools of manipulation, and it rarely announces itself as force. It disguises itself as urgency. Decide now. I need an answer. Why are you taking so long? If you really cared, you would say yes. These phrases are not requests for clarity. They are attempts to bypass it. Urgency compresses time so that reason has no room to breathe. And when time collapses, emotion takes the lead. From a Stoic perspective, urgency is never neutral. It is designed to move you out of alignment with your values by triggering your nervous system. The moment you feel rushed, your body responds before your mind can evaluate. Your heart rate increases. Your breath shortens. Your attention narrows. In that state, you are not choosing. You are reacting. And reaction is exactly what manipulators depend on, because a reactive person is predictable. Stoicism draws a sharp line between impulse and judgment. Impulse belongs to the body. Judgment belongs to the mind. When pressure is applied, the body signals danger, even when none exists. You feel the urge to resolve the tension immediately, to restore comfort by agreeing, explaining, or committing too quickly. But the Stoics trained themselves to pause at this exact moment, not to suppress emotion, but to refuse to be governed by it. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself to insert a space between impression and response. That space is where freedom lives. When you pause, you reclaim ownership of your decision. You move the situation back into the realm of what is up to you. Time, in Stoicism, is not something others are entitled to. It is something you choose how to use. This is where the Stoic pause becomes a form of quiet power. You do not argue with urgency. You do not justify your hesitation. You simply slow the interaction down. The most effective response is also the simplest. I'll think about it. Not maybe. Not let me see. Not I'll get back to you if I can. I'll think about it. And then you do nothing. You do not explain what you are thinking about. You do not provide a timeline unless you choose to. You let the pause stand. People who respect you will accept this without resistance. They understand that thoughtful decisions take time. Those who rely on pressure will reveal themselves almost immediately. They become irritated. They push harder. They try guilt. And in doing so, they answer the question for you. In everyday life, this boundary changes everything. A rushed request at work, a last-minute favor, an emotionally charged demand in a relationship. Each time, the pause protects you from making promises your future self will resent. It keeps your decisions aligned with reason instead of relief. At first, this will feel uncomfortable. Silence always does when you are used to filling it. But discomfort is temporary. The clarity that follows is not. The Stoics understood that no external demand can force a decision unless you consent to the timeline. When you remove urgency, manipulation loses its leverage. What remains is choice. Boundary number 3, exit circular arguments. There is a particular kind of exhaustion that comes not from conflict, but from repetition. You explain your point clearly. They respond, not by engaging with what you said, but by reframing it, twisting it, or shifting the focus slightly. You clarify again. They misunderstand again. Hours later, nothing has moved except your energy, which has quietly drained away. This is not a failure of communication. It is the anatomy of a circular argument. Circular arguments are not designed to reach truth. They are designed to keep you engaged. As long as you are debating, responding, correcting, and defending, the other person retains access to your attention. Stoicism sees attention as a finite resource. When it is spent on arguments that cannot be resolved, it becomes a form of self-neglect. The more articulate and intelligent you are, the more tempting it is to believe that one more explanation will finally make things clear. But clarity is not always the goal on the other side. This is where intentional misunderstanding enters. Some people do not fail to understand you. They refuse to, not out of confusion, but out of advantage. If they acknowledge your point, they lose leverage. So, they ask the same questions in different forms. They debate semantics. They focus on tone instead of substance. They provoke emotional reactions, so the discussion shifts from ideas to behavior. This keeps you just off balance enough to stay invested. Stoicism offers a hard but liberating insight. You are not obligated to convince someone who benefits from not being convinced. Epictetus warned that engaging in disputes over things outside your control is a misuse of reason. Other people's willingness to understand you is not yours to command. What is yours is the choice to remain or to withdraw. Strategic withdrawal is often misunderstood as avoidance or weakness. In Stoic terms, it is neither. It is the disciplined decision to remove yourself from exchanges that erode your inner order. You state your position once, calmly and without excess. You do not escalate your tone. You do not pile on evidence. And when the conversation begins to loop, you step back. You disengage. This may look like changing the subject, ending the conversation, or simply allowing silence to replace debate. Importantly, strategic withdrawal does not require cutting people off or burning bridges. It is not a dramatic exit. It is a shift in participation. You remain courteous. You remain consistent. But you no longer donate your energy to proving what the other person is determined to deny. Over time, this consistency sends a clear signal. You are available for dialogue, not for games. This is where Stoic dignity separates itself from ego battles. Ego wants to win. Ego wants the last word. Ego feels diminished if it is misunderstood. Stoic dignity, by contrast, is indifferent to validation. It does not need agreement to remain intact. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself that the best revenge is not to be like the one who wrongs you. In modern terms, that means refusing to mirror manipulation with reaction. When you exit circular arguments, something subtle but powerful happens. Your mind becomes quieter. You stop rehearsing conversations after they end. You recover hours of attention that were previously spent on friction. And the people who relied on your engagement to maintain control lose their grip. Not because you defeated them, but because you are no longer available to be pulled into their orbit. Boundary number 4. No access without respect. One of the most common ways people lose their power is not through major betrayals, but through small acts of tolerance repeated over time. A dismissive comment, a subtle insult, a boundary crossed and then brushed off with humor. Nothing explosive, nothing worth making a big deal about. And so you move on, smile, engage as usual, and tell yourself it was not intentional. But from a psychological and Stoic perspective, something important just happened. Disrespect was met with continued access. Behavior that carries no consequence is behavior that gets reinforced. This is not about blame or moral judgment. It is about cause and effect. When someone disrespects you and experiences no change in your availability, tone, or emotional presence, they learn that the cost of crossing your line is zero. Over time, this trains the relationship, not in your favor, but against your well-being. Many people sense this intuitively, but respond in a way that makes things worse. They confront dramatically. They vent. They demand apologies. They try to extract understanding through emotional intensity. This is where drama enters. Drama feels powerful in the moment because it releases tension, but it rarely corrects behavior. It often does the opposite. It turns the focus away from the disrespect and toward your reaction. The original issue becomes blurred, and the dynamic shifts to managing emotions rather than restoring order. Stoicism rejects drama, not because it denies emotion, but because it understands leverage. Emotional explosions provide manipulators with exactly what they want: engagement, volatility, and a reason to frame themselves as misunderstood or attacked. In this sense, Drama is not strength. It is noise, and noise makes patterns harder to see and harder to correct. The Stoic alternative is consequence without hostility. This is where many people get confused. They assume consequence means punishment, coldness, withdrawal meant to hurt. But Stoicism is not interested in revenge. It is interested in alignment. A consequence is simply a change in behavior that reflects reality. If respect decreases, access decreases. Not as a threat, not as a tactic, as a fact. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself that you do not need to announce your values. You reveal them through action. In daily life, this might look like shorter replies, less availability, reduced emotional investment, or a quiet step back from someone who repeatedly crosses lines. No speeches, no ultimatums, just consistency. This form of distance is not abandonment. It is correction. It gives the other person space to notice the pattern. Some will adjust. They will recalibrate their behavior when they realize access to you is not unconditional. Others will fade away. Both outcomes are informative. Both restore balance. What matters is that your inner order is no longer compromised in the process. Stoic distance also protects you from resentment. When you continue to give full access to someone who treats you poorly, anger has nowhere to go but inward. It turns into bitterness, self-doubt, and emotional fatigue. By contrast, adjusting access early prevents the build-up. You are no longer suppressing discomfort in the name of peace. You are creating peace through clarity. There is dignity in this approach. You do not need to convince anyone that they were wrong. You do not need their apology to move forward. You simply live in accordance with your standards. Over time, this becomes visible. People sense it in your timing, your presence, and your absence. The relationship either rises to meet that standard or falls away from it. The Stoics understood that freedom does not come from forcing others to change. It comes from refusing to reward what diminishes you. When respect becomes the price of access, manipulation loses its leverage, and your peace stops being negotiable. Boundary number 5. Release guilt when choosing yourself. Of all the boundaries, this is the one that breaks people open. Not because it is complex, but because it goes against years of conditioning. Guilt is not born in the moment you say no. It is inherited. It is learned early, reinforced quietly, and rewarded socially. Somewhere along the way, many people were taught that being good meant being agreeable, that love was maintained by sacrifice, and that discomfort in others was something to be prevented at all costs. Over time, this lesson hardens into identity. You become the one who adapts, absorbs, smooths things over. And when you finally choose yourself, guilt arrives like an alarm. This guilt feels moral, but it is not. It is neurological. Your nervous system learned that approval equals safety. Withdrawal of approval feels like danger. So, when you set a boundary, your body reacts as if you have done something wrong, even when your mind knows you have done something necessary. The tight chest, the urge to explain, the impulse to backtrack. Stoicism does not interpret this as intuition. It recognizes it as conditioning surfacing on its way out. People-pleasing thrives on this confusion. It convinces you that your worth is tied to how little you need, how flexible you are, how available you remain, even when it costs you. But every time you override your own limits to avoid guilt, something subtle happens. You betray yourself. Not dramatically, quietly, and self-betrayal, repeated enough times, erodes trust in your own judgment. You begin to doubt your reactions, second-guess your needs, and rely increasingly on external cues to tell you who to be. Stoicism draws a firm line here. Self-respect is not a feeling, it is a practice. It is built every time your actions align with your values, especially when doing so is uncomfortable. Epictetus was clear that freedom begins the moment you stop trading your inner stability for external approval. This trade never ends in balance. Approval is temporary. Self-respect compounds. Releasing guilt does not mean becoming indifferent or cruel. It means allowing others to feel what they feel without taking responsibility for it. Discomfort in someone else is not proof of harm. Often, it is simply evidence that a familiar pattern has changed. When you stop overgiving, those who benefited from your lack of boundaries will feel the loss. They may call it selfishness. They may say, "You have changed." In one sense, they are right. You have. This is where the rebirth of identity begins. At first, choosing yourself feels unnatural. You wait for the punishment that never quite arrives. You notice that the guilt fades faster each time you hold the line. You begin to feel steadier, less fragmented. Decisions no longer require rehearsals. You stop scanning faces for permission. You realize that peace does not come from being liked. It comes from being aligned. Seneca wrote that a person who is everywhere is nowhere. When you are constantly available, constantly adjusting, constantly accommodating, your life becomes scattered. Releasing guilt allows you to gather yourself back. Your time becomes intentional. Your energy becomes protected. Your relationships become clearer because they are no longer propped up by silent resentment. This boundary changes how you see yourself. You are no longer someone who survives by being agreeable. You become someone who acts from reason. That shift is profound. Manipulators rely on guilt because guilt keeps you explainable, predictable, and movable. When guilt no longer governs your choices, access closes naturally, not through confrontation, but through absence of leverage. The Stoics understood that identity is shaped through repeated action. Each time you choose yourself without apology, you reinforce a new internal order. You are teaching your mind that safety comes from integrity, not approval. Over time, this becomes who you are. Grounded, difficult to rush, impossible to guilt. This is not selfishness. It is maturity. It is the quiet strength of someone who knows where they stand and no longer needs to prove it. What you have learned here is not a set of tactics. It is a return to authorship. Boundaries, when practiced the Stoic way, do not make you rigid or distant. They make you whole. You stop leaking energy into explanations that go nowhere. You stop being rushed into decisions your future self must carry. You stop debating with people who profit from your confusion. You stop offering full access where respect is absent. And finally, you stop mistaking guilt for morality. This is what rebirth looks like in real life. Not dramatic transformation, not a new persona, but a quiet reorganization inside you. Your mind becomes calmer because fewer internal arguments are happening. You replay fewer conversations at night. You feel less need to justify your choices. And most importantly, you begin to trust yourself again. That trust is the foundation of freedom. The Stoics knew this well. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself that peace comes from directing your attention toward what is truly yours to govern. When your boundaries are clear, your attention returns home. You are no longer managed by urgency, guilt, or the need to be understood. You act from reason. You move at your own pace. You choose your direction. Here is the quiet truth. Manipulators do not lose power because you confront them. They lose power because you become unavailable to be pulled. Calm. Consistency does what arguments never can. When your boundaries are lived instead of announced, people feel them. In your tone, in your timing, in your absence, those who respect you will adjust. Those who do not will drift away. Either way, your peace is no longer negotiable. If this message resonated, let it settle. You do not need to implement everything at once. Stoicism is practiced one decision at a time, one pause, one withheld explanation. One boundary held without apology. Over time, these small acts reshape your identity. You go from reacting to life to choosing it. If you want to anchor this lesson, write it in the comments. My peace is not negotiable. And if this path of calm strength and inner clarity speaks to you, subscribe and walk it with us. The work is quiet. The power is real. And once you feel it, you will not go back.